Yeah.
Okay, let me. Okay. Awesome. All right, so this is sort of a going to be a presentation all about how. So I guess start off. My name is Joseph Stay. I've been programming in JavaScript, specifically React, for about 8 months now. But I was doing a internship that ended in January. And so during those about 6 months is when I was really learning JavaScript. I learned it, got that internship about a month after, and sort of worked with them. And yeah, so they are like a esports development company in which they are focused more on the training of esports rather than like an esports organization themselves. And so what happened was they needed people to start out. So they hired a bunch of interns, people who didn't have a ton of work experience. They mostly decided based off of things like just they had like this big questionnaire all about like, you know, describing different video games and how you would design things. And yeah, so I mean, just to start out a little bit more about me, just before that, is that I have been doing about Java since I was 12. And so I have a lot of experience in just programming in general. I've done Python. I've done a handful of other things. I did Android SDK for a while because I had a background in Java. And so I learned XML with that, realized I really like this front end style of thing, and working with the back end Java, learned some Kotlin. And then I was like, okay, let's learn a real language, learn JavaScript. And now I'm here. And so, yeah, the company, they, a little bit more about them is it's basically like you can put in your videos of your gameplay or your team's gameplay, and then it'll output, it uses a few different things. One of them is it has like an AI that can output, it'll see like certain parts of the game, like, okay, we saw that you looked at the scoreboard here. Here's the score at this point in the video. Here's this at the certain point of the video. This is how many kills you got, how other players got, etc. And then you could also annotate over the screen during certain things. It was a very ambitious project on their part, and it was honestly a lot of fun. It was about me and 2 other front-end engineers, and then they had 2 back-end engineers, just completely from scratch. Their name was SpawnN, if you guys ever wanted to look them up. Yeah, so first off was the Figma. The only thing that they gave us was a Figma to work off of, which is great for front end, but for back end, they had to figure out a lot more. The Figma was very interesting. So they had a really good UI UX who I'm sure most of you guys have used Figma, but it was just very interesting for me because I'd never done it before. And so being able to highlight over things, seeing where, how many pixels to the left it was, which isn't very helpful because I think they were using like 1440p, but just a standard 16:9 ratio, whereas that's not super adaptive to all different screen ratios and minimizing it. And so it's very interesting to work with Figma because it's a great starter, but it doesn't really go in depth. So I sort of have some tricks to Figma that I learned through there. The first part is to trust the CSS colors, that those are going to be, when you click on it and it shows you the CSS, is the colors are very nice. Those will, you know, they're going to help you with sort of the theming. It's going to help you just remember all the different things. The other thing is don't trust the CSS, mostly because most of it isn't what you're going to want with how far left and right. And then some things that are just not going to apply to your code, and it's going to just make up a lot of space in your CSS file, and it's not great. Now, there are some things to trust in the CSS, like it's really great for like border radius and just other small things that you're going to need, backgrounds, etc. And then another thing that I learned with Figma is that it's way better to start from the back, the background, and then go to the front. So making sure that the background, so whenever I'm doing my divs, that the background is the first wrapper, and it's just sort of, I design it thinking about how each div is going to start from the back to the front. And yeah, same with the CSS and that way. And another one is to just use it as a good reference point, that it is not a end all be all design. That especially if on the last one, if you have like some creative juice like in you at that point, go all out. You know, the worst comes to worst, you can make it back to the Figma. But if you're feeling good about what you're designing, I mean, I would say go for it. Of course, up to the company, but for us and for the startup, it was always great to just see new designs, especially like I know a lot of JavaScript developers will think a lot more about like hover effects and those small things where some UI UX designers won't. But, yeah, so next up was Firebase Authentication. So this is something that I'll definitely use in personal projects all the time. I don't necessarily suggest it for professional projects, but just because of how easy it is and how it's free for the most part. I mean, once you start using it a lot, it doesn't become free anymore. But I mean, it's great because you have automatic, Google authentication that you can sign in through your Google account, Facebook account, all the ones that it shows up there, or it can natively just do email, phone, anonymous, and you don't have to worry about setting up your own authentication, working with cookies. That Firebase does that all on its own. It's great. Once again, super small level. It's not incredible at large scale designs, but this is just one of the big things I learned. Oh, we can use this for the MVP, and then we'll probably ditch it, kind of a thing. And yeah, this sort of exemplifies just how easy it is. I mean, with here the sign in with Google. All you have to do is, I mean, Google Auth Provider is a function of React Firebase, and then sign in with pop-up, same thing. And it's really that easy. And then all you have to do is just get the auth state from Google's auth state, which once again is just a function that you can pull from React Firebase or import from React Firebase. And it's as simple as just seeing if that's users there and whether or not you're showing the sign-in screen or the regular sidebar. Yeah, so next up on my list of things that I learned was React Bootstrap forms. Just React Bootstrap in general is actually one thing that I found that was incredibly helpful. It makes it a lot easier for you to imagine how you're going to design, for me, in this case, forms, because with forms, it is very row column-esque. And so you can just they just have rows and columns within React Bootstrap. But not only that, but it does a lot of the base designs for you. So it automatically just looks really nice from the get-go. When you click on it, it automatically has that highlight effect. You don't have to worry that much. All you have to worry about is changing some of the CSS and such. But not only that, but it also has some nice class names, control ID, a little bit of other stuff. You have this automatic large text, normal text, small text, and it's just all sized nicely for you. So for instance, this code right here corresponds to this, that I can think of this sort of select a game area into a row. At the top is just the title, a row, column, column, column for each one. So it's going to evenly space them. I don't have to worry too much about the CSS there. Another row, column, 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 and then a final row for just the button, and it splits it up through the entire row. And that's what I like. It also, when you're using with something like the card and card.body and the container, it'll automatically indent it a little as well. React Bootstrap is great. I loved using their forms and just redesigning it to our Figma. It was awesome. And yeah, so this was probably my favorite thing that I worked on with them with the dynamic search. Let me go ahead and pull it up actually. And so with this, it's a pretty simple search bar. You have this list of heroes in Overwatch 2, in which when you're searching for them, it's basically just dot includes, which I'll go over in a little bit. But not only that, you have the buttons on the side where it switches between these little crests down here, whether tank, DPS, or support. And you can search for that as well. But then it also has two other tabs that you can click towards. And you have these other things in which they didn't want me to like fill out all the different countries and such because they didn't know if they were going to use this yet. But this one is pretty cool where you have the heroes. You can also filter through the drop-down menus. And yeah, so just to go over some of the code there that I think is quite interesting is that it's pretty simple. So first off, it's all it really is just three different objects in which it's just three different HTML elements, three different pages that I'm switching between based off of which button is quote unquote active. And so that's what the code on the left is. And all it's doing for creating it is that it's just adding to the class list selected to it or unselecting it. And that not only tells me if the class name right here, we have the on-click functions for each of them, but right here we have, in order to make the first one blue, in order to make each one look selected at a time, we have to deselect the current one and then select the new one. So we have to store the previous one and then select the new one and use the switch statement to get there. And yeah, so then for the actual that first page with the search, it's a pretty simple search. You have just whenever it changes, you have an input handler, and the value itself is just a state. For the input handler, what we're doing is we're first just setting the target to lowercase so that it's all consistent throughout. And then that's what we're going to set the input text to. And that's what we're going to set the search input to. So then we have this filtered data, which is just a function that we are going to use to take a JSON file that I have that has all those heroes listed in it and their names, IDs, and then each role that they have. And it's going to take their names into this filtered data and sort through the names depending on whatever is inputted. So that's what this is right here. You have the text going into it. And if the input text isn't anything or is something, then it's going to return the text. It's going to make sure it's lowercase because all of the names are in lowercase. And then it's going to just see if any of that includes that was in the search bar, if any of that includes what we inputted. And then this filter role, I'll come back to in a second. But yeah, so just right here, this is the HTML towards that is that we have filtered data and then we're mapping, putting in an item. And the item that we really need is the item.text. So this item is the JSON each. And yeah, so with that, it then is just pretty simple HTML. From here, I have a get image for just a function that returns the image depending on what the name of each of those heroes are. And yeah, right here, this is sort of how I did it with when you click on the individual roles and then it filters through all the different roles. So each one that is a tank, each one that's a DPS, each one that's a support is 3 on clicks. I'm sending into the handle to click role. I'm sending in the actual object itself. And then I'm going to send in whether I click on tank, support, or DPS. And with that, what I'm doing is I'm doing the same thing, basically the same thing that I was doing earlier with the buttons up top. But so setting this current one to not selected and selecting this one to selected, but then going into the filtered data and setting the filtered role, which we see right here. And instead we're filtering it by the role, the L.class instead of the names, the text. Yeah, it's not really more than that. and yeah, so that's it for those. Pretty simple, pretty fun, pretty dynamic. It just so that was the other thing, is that you are able to filter by both, not with this code, but so when I was talking with them, the big thing here was that they wanted it to be, because that there's so little heroes, they didn't want to bother trying to filter with both, and they thought it'd be more valuable to do it with that. But I mean, that should be as simple as doing the filtered class on top of it. So you just have this else also be the l.text to lowercase that includes. Then yeah, so then back to those drop-down menus that had the filter on top. This is another thing that I took away, is the React Bootstrap drop-downs. So the drop-downs with React Bootstrap, the way they work here is basically you have a template that you're basing off each one of your drop-down menus on. And with that template, then you're basically just putting in items. So this as, and then this country custom menu is the template that we're using. And then we can just put in the individual items. So this is just the individual items, just the template, or not the template, just some boilerplate items that I put in there, and you can filter by, but the filter doesn't come in here. These are just the items. And I then here just have a use state for setting whatever the current selected drop-down item is. It's just a pretty simple use state and setting that state to that I just clicked on. So that's what this arrow function is right here. But yeah, so then this is the one that shows all the different heroes. It's pretty similar to the other ones. It's just I'm taking that data, that JSON file that I have, and it's just mapping each one of those items similar to the previous one. I just have the name and then the image. I guess the image is to the left of it, and then the name. And then for the actual quote unquote templates, you take the reference style, class name, etc. But the main part of the template is going to be right here. This is where we have this filtered part, where what we're doing is we have the input right there, and we want this to be on all of them, no matter what item it is. We want that item there, and then we actually have the list of all the different items, and we want to make sure that we filter through each one of the items depending on what this value is. So the value.to lowercase. And for this one, starts with made a little bit more sense, because we figured that for filtering through dropdown is a little bit different than just a search bar. But yeah, so then that's really it for the dropdown menus. Then the final thing that I really want to talk about with this is the Firebase storage. So the storage was something that we used. Once again, I'm not sure if I would use it past a personal project. You totally could, and it's pretty easy to get to if you have an API. But using Google's, it's a little bit complicated. So the whole idea is that we want to have an input, upload the file, then we're going to get the user's ID, then we're going to go to the user's image folder within Google, and then we're going to name the profile picture. So this code right here is for the profile picture itself. For the it's within a form, and we have a button on the bottom that says submit. But the main part here is we have the wrapper, we have the profile picture where it's just the default image, and we're seeing if a image has been uploaded yet with this state right here, the single URL. And if there's nothing in that URL at the moment, then we just have a default image that we're going to. And then we have also an input within the same wrapper, so that in the CSS, we can just basically make it invisible and make it look like when you click on the profile picture, the default profile picture, you can then upload whatever file you want. And then for that, we want to handle the image after we upload it. So that's the on change. we want to get the picked file. We're going to get the file, and we're going to set a state to it. And then we sort of start this big, long adventure that is using Google Firebase. So you first have to get the collection reference, then the server query, and we have to query the collection reference where the UID is the same as the current user's user ID. Then we have to take a query snapshot to get the document of that server query that we just made. And then within that query snapshot, we need to get the document ID. So then for the actual task itself of uploading it, we need to first go into the storage reference. We want to go into the user image file and just go to .child. This is just image one. This was great for just naming for testing purposes, because I would want it to overwrite the same file. And I don't want a bunch of different files appearing. And I also wanted to make sure that if we have two files, one's image one and the other's the image one, that it rewrites it, because each user ID is going to be different. And if the same user ID uploads it, it is going to overwrite their previous. It's not going to store it. And the .put is the actual file that we're putting in itself. And then an asynchronous task, we upload the task right here. And we want to make sure that, that it's on the state changed, so that we know that the file itself is actually uploaded. And we take a snapshot and we console.log the progress with that snapshot, so that we can see in the console the percent that the file has been uploaded. We want to log any errors. Oh yeah, this is another thing I'd like to mention. When working with forms, especially when you have this whole sign-up process and sign-in process, you want to have like a disabled box that is an error function, and you want an error state set to that, where if there is anything in that error, you're displaying that error box in the form, so that at any point that error is an error, instead of just like console.logging the error, you can also just set the error just using a use state set, and that an internal error occurred, and no matter what, that's just going to pop up at the top. The user knows, and then we know. But then, yeah, after that, what we want to do is we need to then get that image that we uploaded. We need to get a link to that image. And so we have another arrow function where we're going back into that storage of the user image, getting that child. Once again, this would be user ID in the actual use. And we get the download URL, get that image URL, set our state to that image URL, then getting the document reference. And this is adding to the database in your user, and we're updating the user and adding a image URL to that user in the database of that user's, I can't think of the name for it, but in that user's tree. Yeah, so that's the long way of doing, there's not really a short way. That's the way you can upload a file, specifically an image, with Google Firebase. And that was actually something really valuable, simply because of a lot of personal projects and professional projects, because this is how a lot of it is going to be, where you want to get that snapshot and, log in the progress. You're going to have errors. You're going to be going through different collections and databases. And yeah, so I guess overall, just sort of key takeaways that I got from it was, a big one was communication, especially with such a small company. There'd be times where it'd be like, the front end thought we were using Firebase for like the main database, and then back end was like, we've been using Mongo this whole time. And it just wasn't communicated to us that, okay, just don't bother with the database right now. Don't worry about that. Just to basically design it. We'll worry about implementation with an API later. The other one is to plan out really what you're going to do, and like what you're going to sit down for the next hour or two, and what you are going to specifically do. That was a big one, especially when you're looking at a Figma. You sort of you have a task, but then splitting that task up into either smaller tasks and just specifically planning, okay, I'm going to make the background, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do these specific things in this amount of time. Another one is just how incredible flow is. The flow state is really awesome, especially when you're working on like a Friday night and you're just going, and then you look at the clock and it's like, oh, it's 1 a.m. And then the last one is that good work is satisfying. That was the biggest one. Working at such a small company, knowing that just in 6 months, like what all we did, and that all I personally did, and that that good work really is satisfying. And that's my presentation. Any questions? So how would you do it with class list? Oh, I did it with a class list. What's the React way, I should say? Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. Right.